apparently at one point there was a planet-wide, highly technical civilization on this planet, and something happened. War and or geophysical changes, or both, and what we think of as our history, beginning with the Sumerians, coming up to the Egyptians, Babylonians, and now up to the Greeks, Romans, Western civilization, of course, is what we're primarily talking about. That is nothing but the remnants of an earlier prehistoric civilization. The evidence is everywhere. The round balls of Guatemala, the pyramids all over the world, in China, in South America, Central America, Egypt, the ziggurats in Mesopotamia. All of the evidence is there. But it's only been within about the past 100 years that we've had the technology and or the knowledge to know anything about it. We're still pulling ourselves out of the dark ages.
The Egyptian pyramids were designed to produce chemicals on an industrial scale.
Temples were refineries. That's where they refined the gold. They took the raw gold and changed the structure so that they'd have plenty of it to supply the priests and pharaohs of the country.
As a pharaoh, Moses would have known all of the secrets of the priests and pharaohs. Moses would have known all about the bread of life, made from the white powder of gold. The Egyptians called the powder MUFKUTZ, but they knew it was no ordinary mineral. MUFKUTZ means what is it? But literally translated, the hieroglyph reads spirit, fire, stone, part magic, part precious mineral. Manna in Hebrew is also translated as what is it? Manna, the miraculous edible substance that God provided for the Israelites during their travels in the Sinai, and that was stored by Moses in the Ark of the Covenant.
The priest chemists of Egypt would then extract this black material through a secret alchemical procedure and turn it into a white powder of gold, creating these cakes called MUFKUTZ, manna, or as the Greek Septuagint Bible calls it, the bread of the presence. When consumed, this material became bioelectrical, upgrading the body's mental capacity, physical health, and energy fields over time, causing physical regeneration when combined with spiritual practices.
And this location in the Sinai desert was actually a processing plant, a place where this substance was made, and this is why it was a sacred place for the pharaohs. On various stelae at the site, there are numerous inscriptions referring to white bread. Many believe that the white powder was something consumed by pharaohs in the form of bread cakes for its spiritual and powerful side effects. Maybe the Ark of the Covenant, which was created by the Israelites whilst camping out in the Sinai desert, was also filled with this substance. Some say that monatomic gold wasn't just ingested, but it has powers such as levitation and superconductivity. Then, Moses asks the Israelites to consume it.
When the people of Israel saw it, they said to each other, "What is it?" Manna. For they did not know what it was, and Moses said to them, "It is the bread which the Lord has given you to eat." And they would take this powder and they mold it into little cakes and stuff, and they'd eat it. This was the manna that helped them survive in the wilderness all this time. Was this the white powder of gold? Ground it to a powder and made the children of Israel eat it.
It says it's palladium. After palladium reads platinum. After that, as the various boiling temperatures were reached, came ruthenium, rhodium, iridium, and at 220 seconds, osmium. Every one of the platinum group metals was in this substance.
Ormus, manna, and so on, and is believed to have a superconducting, high spin and low energy state.
It's a monatomic superconductive anti-gravitational substance. Used to be used for feeding the light bodies of Babylonian kings.
If a star twinkles in the heavens, it affects the superconductor.
5% of the dry weight of the human brain and nervous system is constructed of materials in the ormic state.
This material, when we analyze using thermogravimetric analysis on the iridium, rhodium, platinum, palladium, gold, and silver, while we find is all of them superconduct, it will flux flow within your body, and you literally will develop an aura that is maybe 50 times what you have right now. And you will appear to glow when you walk in the room. You will be one with the Godhead, as he said, all knowledge, all past, and all future is there in the vacuum, And when you have this superconducted body, you literally are one with the Godhead. You are one with the vacuum, and you don't have to read a book. You don't have to study anything. You have all knowledge and all understanding. You literally can read the minds of other people without talking. You don't have to eat again. All you need is a very minute amount of water, and you literally can exist without aging for 800 to 1,000 years. This is why the gods came here to earth, according to Sitchin, to get gold. It was very important to their society and their life. It was their food. They needed the gold.
It was said that this was the food of the light body. They said we all have bodies, but we don't just have physical bodies, we have light bodies. And just as we feed our physical bodies, they said, we have to feed our light bodies so that they will be nurtured and grow in the same way. They have to be as fulfilled as the physical body. And they call the light body the car. Why do we only use a fraction of our brain power? Why don't we use the rest? Well, it's there to be used if we knew what to do with it. We need the trigger. We need the unlocking device. These materials are it. They're what was used to feed the car, the light body, to give anti-aging, to restore the youth, to take the pharaohs into the afterlife or whatever.
If you don't believe humans can transform into angels, you got to think again, because that's the whole premise of this mystic teaching, is that humans can be transformed into angels. That's what the Essenes were all about. Angel theophany, they call it. Angelomorphism, morphing into an angel. It's the foundational premise of all these ancient mystic schools, is that humans can transform into angels and ride this beam of light into the stars. And what they are fundamentally describing here is this transformation of how we become these celestial beings. The Essenes sought this bodily and spiritual perfection in order to transform the earth into a place of light and love, but also to cross over the boundary between earth and heaven.
Many of the greatest spiritual adepts in history were fully aware of this phenomenon and were specifically working towards it. You may even be unaware that each spiritual tradition has its own name for the rainbow body. This is just the name the Tibetans gave it. Daoists call it the diamond body, and people who attain it are known as immortals. Most of the time, the person who attains a rainbow body will have completed the process while meditating in a cave by themselves. In the process, the physical body dissolves into its natural state, which is that of clear light. The rainbow body is called such because those who witness people attaining it see the person's body slowly dissolve and a new rainbow-colored energetic form taking its place. And as the physical body dissolves, it transforms from its gross manifestation of flesh and bones into pure essence, has 5 different colors: blue, green, white, red, and golden yellow. As the body dissolves, a rainbow mix of these 5 colors form, and usually all that remains of the physical body are fingernails and hair. It is believed that Jesus went through this process, as did thousands of other high-level spiritual adepts since his time. And I do believe that people have been achieving the rainbow body well before the time of Jesus, probably going all the way back to the time of Atlantis, and even earlier. As recently as 1998, Tibetans have been reported transforming into a rainbow body. David Wilcock documents some specific cases in his books, The Synchronicity Key and The Source Field Investigations.
So what they're saying, people, is that your consciousness, the atoms of your consciousness, can literally travel in space-time. They can go anywhere they want to go, anytime they want. The problem is your physical body has to stay here. Now, the ancient Egyptians, I think, understood this better than anybody. They said we have a physical body that we must feed physical food to so we can grow and become what we're meant to be. But they also said we have a light body, which they call the Ka, and they said you have to feed your light body so it can grow and become what it's meant to be. Well, when you feed your light body, you're feeding your consciousness. You're actually feeding it with the asymmetrically deformed high-spin states of atoms. But these atoms in your body literally interact with the DNA. They literally interact with the cells of your body. They actually interact with the, what do you call them, carbules? And when you understand that when they are sufficient density in your body, so that quantum coherence occurs, that literally everything begins to act as one. And they are capable of totally bending space-time. Totally bending space-time, where even your material body disappears. 5 months, we gave him 2,500 milligrams for 5 days. And what happened is the kundalini started. He was just laying there in bed after having sex. He's just nice and relaxed and enjoying the afterglow, and all of a sudden here comes the kundalini. He never had it before. He said, whoa, what's happening here? You know, for a woman it might have been all right. For a man, this is really confusing. You know, there's no erection, there's nothing, and yet it's going on. And he was all confused. He's embarrassed, in fact. He wouldn't tell me about it first. He didn't know what was going on. Anyway, he said it got to happening more often and more often and more often. He actually got up where he's having the kundalini experience 10 times a day. He said, Dave, you just be walking down the street, and all of a sudden here it come. He said, you didn't work on it at all. I mean, it wasn't meditation, it wasn't introspection, it wasn't anything. It just happens without even working. I believe, and this is my personal opinion, but I believe that you continue to take this material until you can get the kundalini energy to sustain itself continually. So it doesn't end, it's just continuous all day long, all night long. And what happens is, at that point, you literally pass through it and out the other side. At that point, you literally achieve this condition of perfect phase conjugation in the body, everywhere. And literally, your whole body begins to function as a single atom. Okay, at that point, you have shrunken your molecular body down and climbed inside the atom, where time goes backwards and time goes forward the same. That this perfect superconducting body has literally become a single atom. And you are now an immortal. There is no time anymore. And this phase conjugation wave is what you must achieve. You must get enough of this in your body that there's perfect phase conjugation, and literally you become the perfected being. And you must pass through the kundalini and out the other side, and there's no sensation anymore of the kundalini. You literally have achieved a state where there is no time as we know it. There is no time forward, there is no time backwards. You literally become timeless. And from that point, people, where there is no time, there is nothing that we know in this material world can explain that condition, except you can see everything from that perspective. You can see the future, you can see the past, you can know the hearts and minds of others. It's just it's like up on top of a mountaintop where you can see in all directions from that point. There's just a knowing that you have at that point. Really starts you thinking. If you really have faith in this, climb in the wagon. Anyway, moreover, as this high-frequency resonance becomes aligned with the biotransducer system of the body, the 7 chakras can be completely transfigured into the divine image. Literally, you can become the perfect Melchizedek priest, or the Melech Zedek, or, if you like it, the enlightened being, the immortal. Okay? That's what you can achieve. At that point, all the chakras disappear, and you literally become the quantum one, the singularity, the I am. One in the Godhead, one in the body of Christ, one with the cosmic consciousness, one with all knowledge and understanding. You know, the Hebrews, they talk about the descent, the 333, the 666, the 999, back to the 12, 12, 12. That's the cycle they talk about. And we descend to the 666, the mortal man, the animalistic man. That's as far away from 12, 12, 12 as we can get. And then the reascension is the 9, and then back to the 12. It's like a clock face, make the whole cycle. The falling away, and then return back to God. They also talk about here the Merkabah mysticism, which a lot of you know about, the Merkabah, love, spirit, soul. That's actually an Egyptian word, love, spirit, soul, Merkabah. Okay? You know, in the Dead Sea Scrolls, if you read this carefully, the Dead Sea Scrolls uncovered, you'll find out that the Essenes believe they had angels living in their community. And you find out that John the Baptist was an Essene, that many of the disciples were Essenes, and that Mary was an Essene. But in fact, Mary continued in the temple as a dove, educated there, and received her food from the hand of an angel. This is from the forgotten books of the Bible, from the time of Christ. That Mary was fed by an angel. She was actually raised as a high priest. You ever notice that Mary always has this halo about her when they always paint Mary? And Christ always has this halo?
Anubis, which is the black jackal, which symbolically represented the digestive system. All right. It's referred to as the manna, food of the gods, food of the spirit, bread of the presence, semen of the Father in heaven, the golden tear from the eye of Horus, or that which issues from the mouth of the Creator. And in the Egyptian rite of passage, you literally took into your body the semen of the Father in heaven. You were born again as a son of God, not a son of man, and you now were thought of as a god, not a regular man. And the Pharaoh was considered a god, and they looked upon him as a god, but he had gone through the Egyptian rite of passage. The Melchizedek priests supposedly could read people's minds, they could see the future, they knew all things. Anyway.
The reason that I believe gold was important was because in ancient times they understood the importance of the white powder gold, or the anatomical gold, to life itself. When Jesus was born, they took him frankincense and myrrh and gold. They didn't give him a brick. They gave him anatomical gold. And Mary Magdalene was the daughter of the king of Jordan, and she was also fed the anatomical gold because it works to open our minds. It's a necessary material we need to have to function. And what we're seeing with our working with Ormus materials now is that people are chronically short of these. Tibetan priests are capable of attaining a certain level of theta and alpha for 20 minutes at a time. And Hudson found that people that were taking Ormus without any long-term training on meditation were capable of taking the same theta and alpha ranges for 3 to 4 hours.
They were using this stuff in ancient Egypt.
Very, very old, yeah. There's actually an Egyptian hieroglyph for what they called showbread. So the actual hieroglyph just looks like a little dish with a high cone of powder in the dish. In the Bible, for example, when Moses went up the mount to collect the tablets, the Israelites collected all of their gold together. They fashioned a golden calf and they were worshiping it when Moses came down. Well, it says exactly in Exodus 32, verse 20, it says, Moses smashed the calf to a powder. He strew the powder on the water and he made the Israelites drink of it. That's exactly what it is. Moses was part of the Egyptian royal family, and they had been trained as alchemists for thousands of years because these materials were available to the high priests and to the pharaohs.
Okay.
All right. So why would they be only the high priests and the pharaohs had access to this?
Well, because they were the elite, I would imagine it's the same as today. How come a certain percentage of the elite have everything and the rest of us don't have very much? It's part of the hidden knowledge that's been passed in leaps and bounds, through history, and today it's starting to become known again. All kinds of improvements and all kinds of things. And we have a little girl in Florida who's been taking Ormus, and she was born with cerebral palsy. So, the fists were clenched, the arms are clenched, and so on. By the 4th day that she'd been taking it, her mother, then a friend, and 2 teachers commented about the improvements in her speech. and within 3 weeks her hands were open 80% of the time. And today she's learning how she can draw, she can paint inside circles and squares, her motor control's developing, and I mean, she's the only person in the world taking this stuff with cerebral palsy that I know of. So, in the U.S. today, cancer is a $1.3 billion per day business. You know, if you cure your client, you lose a customer.
At the same time, I touched on their use in the medical arena, in the field of cancer treatment particularly. And more especially, I discussed the gravity-defying attributes of these exotic white powder substances, their ability to literally bend, distort, and manipulate space-time. Type 1 superconductors, these are the ones that we're primarily interested in, they function perfectly because the forward and reverse spin electrons pair up. They pair up as mirror images of each other. They become duplicates of themselves, like clones. But they don't destroy each other. They become single frequency photons, but they're no longer particles. They become light-bearing waves. And the secret of these monatomic substances is their ability to attract and store and dispense light. They will attract and store any amount of light. You can keep pouring it in. Light's an amazing substance because unlike gases and solids and water, if one took this room and closed up all the apertures and windows and filled it with water, there would be a point at which it's full. If you tried the same with gas, there would be a point at which it's full. You can compress the gas and keep going, but there would still be a point at which it's full. With light, not so. You can keep pumping any amount of light into a space and it will keep on taking it, rather like a dimmer switch. It's the same with monatomic substances, and it's from that their energy ultimately becomes obtainable. Well, it's interesting because scientists in recent times have actually called this material the light of life, because it resonates with DNA on the same frequencies. It's a light wave.
And ultimately, they tell us that our divine spark, this spark of the godlight, if you will, has the power to morph the human body into its next higher dimension or higher level form. In the Judeo-Christian tradition, they call this the seraphim. And as I explored last night, the ancients believed that the human body can be shifted or changed, morphed into its angelic state, especially that of the seraphim, beings of pure light and pure love. I'm also going to be comparing them with the Tibetan rainbow body of light tradition. The Tibetans believe that the human body is designed to be spun into a vortex of energy that ultimately manifests as 5-colored rainbow light, leaving behind only hair, toe, and fingernails. So think about that your body is designed to be spun into this vortex, and the whole thing can be transmuted into light spontaneously, instantly, according to the Tibetans. We shall be, in fact, exactly like the resurrected Christ. But if you don't like to follow the Christian tradition, then what they're saying is that we will be exactly like the angels, the seraphim, the watchers, and we will also be just like Padmasambhava and other Tibetans who have attained the rainbow body of light. That is our goal right there, according to all of these spiritual traditions.
Zogs meaning perfection and Chen meaning great. The word Dzogchen implies the great perfection, highest attainments of Dzogchen meditation, the rainbow body. Dzogchen deemed as the ultimate and surest path among the 9 vehicles that lead to emancipation, which is the Tibetan Buddhist practice that is said to give rise to the rainbow body phenomenon. It's very well documented in many Eastern teachings, and in one documented case, hand impressions are visible outside the Asura caves, even today in Nepal, traced to an 8th century Indian Buddhist master.
When you go to Tibet, you learn of what's called the Great Perfection tradition. And in this tradition, the Tibetans teach that the human body was designed to be transformed into a being of light. It matches very closely the energetic pattern of what we see in the Tibetan tankas of the rainbow body beings. Is Osiris, in his resurrection, a rainbow body being? We can't answer that definitively, but we can follow that trail and see that perhaps the ancient Egyptians, in their descriptions in the pyramid texts and elsewhere, are describing human transformation into lightning-like celestial beings. And what they meant by that is the same thing the Tibetans mean when they describe the human transformation into rainbow body beings. And that is the same thing that the Essenes mean when they talk about humans becoming perfect humans. Again, the rainbow body teaching in Tibet is referred to as the great perfection. And his resurrected name, Osiris took on the name Wenenefer, the one who continues to be perfect. But the basic idea here is that our human body can be spun or accelerated into a vortex, or a flying saucer of energy that ultimately manifests as 5-colored rainbow light. Even the colors are the same. And these are traditional colors that this mystic Islamic dancer is displaying here. Even the colors are the same. This new body is called the rainbow body of light, or the glory body, and it resembles a misty or luminous cloud, which is why you see Jesus flying around on a cloud in Second Coming imagery, and why he's in the ring, because it suggests or tells us that he has attained this higher level of awareness. So I connect the Tibetan Lama in the rainbow ring with Jesus, and also the ancient Sumerian depictions of the Anunnaki in their winged rings. Those are probably not hardware flying saucers, although they could be. More than likely, we are dealing with higher consciousness beings who have manifested a more vibrant or light body.
Transformation of the physical body into what's known as a light body. Some people think of this as enlightenment. When regular people pass away, which is 99.9% of us, let's face it, they undergo a physical death and a resulting reincarnation process eventually. The usual wheel of life and death, or the wheel of karma, that we all go around and round. However, those who are able to create this rainbow body are reborn into a higher dimension of existence, no longer needing to reincarnate to Earth. This is the best and optimal situation, and perhaps the ultimate goal of nearly every spiritual adept. It's basically going to another level and leaving the birth, death, and reincarnation cycle on the Earth plane. In fact, many of the world's greatest spiritual figures in history were fully aware of this phenomenon, and were specifically working to achieve it. You may even be unaware that almost every spiritual tradition has its own name for the rainbow body. This is just the name that the Tibetan spiritualists gave it. Daoists from China call it the diamond body, and people who attain it are known as the immortals. In the religion of Sufism, the rainbow body is called the most sacred body. The yogis, who I identify the most with, call it the divine body. In Kriya Yoga, which was passed on to us by Babaji, it is known as the body of bliss. Now, even the ancient Egyptians from thousands of years ago knew about it and called it the luminous body. And I can continue on giving more examples here. The Gnostics called it the radiant body. It's even mentioned in the Emerald Tablets of Thoth, where it was referred to as the golden body. So if all these ancient spiritual traditions had a name for it, and many of them were separated by thousands and thousands of miles and centuries, even thousands of years in time, it seems very unlikely to me that the rainbow body is not a true phenomenon. Yet most people, I would venture to say, have never heard of it, and this is perhaps because attaining the rainbow body is something rare and special, at least to us in Western society. However, even the ancient Christians knew about it and referred to it as Ascension. In case you think the rainbow body is just a myth, it's been speculated that it has been achieved by no less than 160,000 people in China and Tibet throughout their history, with many of those cases being documented in the country's literature. Let's take a look now at what happens when a spiritual adept attains the rainbow body, and then we'll talk about how to cultivate it. Because when it's all said and done, anything that you've achieved in this life will probably pale in comparison to attaining the rainbow body. And it only has to be done once.
We see Christ up above as a celestial or a light being, an ethereal being, because they know the Ark of the Covenant is his throne. It's his vehicle that creates this pillar or this conduit. And that is the cross of Christ. And there's the pun. Christ uses this pillar or conduit to cross through dimensions, to go from the higher thinking, from the higher dimensional realms into the lower vibrational realm of Earth. That's what the Ark of the Covenant is used for. It's a crossing device, a Stargate crossing device. I asked Jesus, he said, Jesus, what's required for eternal life? And Jesus replied, follow the commandments, which are, how do we achieve our eternal light body? Love with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment, and the second is like unto it. Love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and the prophets hang on these two commandments. You want to know how to manifest your light body, your rainbow body, and achieve eternal life? There's your North Star right there. Just do that. With every breath you take, every thought you think, every emotion, do that, and you're going to be just fine. Easier said than done, isn't it? Well, that's why it's so challenging. But that's also why it's so utterly simple. I don't have to say another word here about the process of ascension. I've just told you the whole secret right there. That's all we need to know. Everything else is just kind of, filling up the rest 45 minutes of our presentation. Oh, it's a little bit more than that, but you get what I'm saying. This is the secret right here. This is why we are on Earth. This is what we are here to learn. And we will leave Earth when we have demonstrated our ability to do this. That's Judgment Day, when our heart is weighed against the feather of cosmic truth. How light-hearted of a being are you? How light of a being are you? If your heart weighs less than the feather, you go on. If not, it's back to diapers.
So why not enhance the pineal gland to produce more melatonin? Why not enhance the pituitary gland to produce more serotonin? So that's the area that they're moving into now, and these materials will do exactly that. In today's world, the Institute for Advanced Studies in Austin in Texas has described these materials as exotic matter. It can think of no better way to explain them. They're exotic. They conform to no rules, and that they're not like anything else they've ever known. They are not on the periodic table of elements. Science has never known about them until the last few years. The Center for Advanced Study in Illinois classifies superconductivity, which is one of their main attributes, as the most remarkable property in the universe. So we've got something pretty amazing here. We've got a very ordinary looking white powder, which is exotic beyond any comparison and contains abilities which are the most remarkable properties in the universe. So this is not just something that's being worked on in America or in Britain. We've got Denmark, we've got Austria, we've got India, we've got Russia, German scientists, Switzerland even, all over the world now. Various scientific research institutions and universities, research departments are working on various aspects of this, and everybody is saying exactly what they said in Illinois. This is the most important physical property in the universe. They know now that this is going to take us where we have to go, because we've got big leaps to make to get from where we are in science, and they want to turn these big leaps into a few steps. NASA has written, this is the stuff of Star Trek's teleportation of matter by way of a light beam.
What she is saying to him is, Ptah, thank you. You fashioned human DNA. And in my interpretation of this, you fashioned human DNA to make our body a more conducive vehicle so that we could become more like the gods, that we ourselves would be capable of transmuting our physical flesh and blood bodies into light so that we can be like the original light beings that founded the island civilization. Now, the Edfu texts tell us that when these lords of light came to Earth, they brought technology with them. undoubtedly spiritually based technology. What the Tibetans say these light beings can do, they can phase in between their earthly flesh and celestial flesh. It's a matter of tuning the frequency of the human body and ultimately dissolving our flesh and blood body into the rainbow light body. I believe that this is what the Egyptian creation texts are describing that the founders of Atlantis could do. These groups of beings, who later took on the appearance of the bird-headed falcon beings, had the ability as lords of light to phase into the earth plane, phase into physicality, interact with human beings, and then phase back into their higher frequency, purer or perfected light being status.
Moses had been up the mountain. He'd come down with the Ten Commandments, and then he broke the tablets because he got terribly angry to see that his brother Aaron had collected all the gold earrings from the Israelites and melted them down and made a golden calf as an idol of worship. And he said, well, that may be the way we used to do things. We don't do that anymore. We have this new culture here that we're part of, and I've just spoken to the Lord of this culture, and we don't worship graven images anymore. And he got very angry. And then it says this, that he took the golden calf, he burnt it with fire, he transposed it with powder, mixed that with water, and fed it to the Israelites. Interesting little story. He took the gold, burnt it with fire, and transposed it into powder. That doesn't work. You heat gold with fire or burn gold with fire, you get molten gold, you don't get powder. Nobody, it seems, thought to ask the question. They use this, it says, to make bread. They could mix it with frankincense, the Bible tells us, and mold little bread cakes, which the most ancient Bible text that we have, the Septuagint, the old Greek Bible, calls bread of the presence, presumably bread of the presence of God or of something important. Shamana means firestone. This is a relief from that temple, another relief showing a bread presentation again. It was always linked with bread. They were always little conical shapes. We know that from about 2,500 BC, the pharaohs in Egypt, or the kings before they became pharaohs in Greek times, were ingesting the bread cakes of this white powder substance. Only the metallurgical adepts knew the secret of its manufacture. Metallurgical adepts, yep, it's made from metal, that makes sense. The high priest of the temples had a very strange title. The high priests of the Egyptian temples were called the great artificers. Well, a great artificer is a worker in materials, particularly metals. So that was sort of interesting. It's beginning to link together, and thinking back to Petrie's concept, yeah, these were places of worship, not worship. Temples were not the same as churches, that evolved from the concept. I actually looked in just the English language word etymological dictionary from Oxford University that traces the origin of words, and lo and behold, I only had to go back 700 years to discover that the word we now use as worship had a K in the middle of it. It was worship. They used to work for the gods. They didn't used to worship the gods. They used to work for the gods, whoever the gods were. Moses had taken the Israelites and they'd crossed this land of Sinai to get from Egypt into the promised land. And en route there, they'd stopped at this amazing mountain. And this was the mountain where Moses saw the burning bush. It was where he received the Ten Commandments and the book of the law. It was where he seemingly spoke with God, and where they built the Ark of the Covenant. And this whole story is full of accounts of fires and all sorts of amazing magical things going on. Anyway, they decided to climb this mountain. They climbed it. 2,500 feet above ground level, they found a great plateau with this temple, an Egyptian temple in the middle of nowhere. 270 feet of it on this plateau. Another equal amount of it back inside a cave that was carved into the mountain. This thing was very important. At the time, they didn't know what they were looking for. They didn't know what they'd found, but they found a secreted hoard of pure, unadulterated white powder. which they said they winnowed and they sieved and they tested. There was nothing there, no residue of anything, just this amazing powder, which he said would disappear into your fingerprints. It was so fine. It seemed to have been an operative workshop, he said, more of a place of work than worship. The whole thing was dedicated, it seems, to MUFKUTZ and the production of MUFKUTZ. Every pharaoh from the 4th dynasty to the 19th dynasty was portrayed there. Every pharaoh had stated things that were written on tablets in this mountain. So these wall reliefs depict, going through the pharaohs of numerous dynasties, strange presentations. This is an example of one. This is drawn up by the Egypt Exploration Fund, this particular one from a relief. This is Pharaoh Amenhotep III. This is an 18th dynasty pharaoh, and the caption, and these are all captioned in hieroglyphs. It says, Shebek Hotep brings the noble and precious stone to his majesty. He is the guardian who brings the bread, because he is the great one over the house of gold. So we have this, and we have this fellow here called Shebek Hotep, a treasurer fellow who's holding in the middle of the picture this cone-shaped object. So the association is there, and there are numerous of these. And once that had been discovered in this Sinai temple, the moment Egyptologists went back into Egypt and began to look, they kept finding these. MUFKUTZ, cones, bread, light. It was about bread. It was about something the kings ingested. They were eating this material that was formed into little cakes, but it was a powder. What we are seeing here is really quite amazing. The tests show it to be highly effective. The effect is immediate and cumulative. What they do here is to work on brainwave patterns, and they try to synchronize these things, and they found that this material could do it. The theory and the logic behind it is that the better balancing between left and right brain produces, and these are their words, a greater intelligence, enhanced creativity, improved mind-body coordination, more agility and less stress. Well, okay, that makes sense. If we're operating as we should be, that's what we should have. But we're none of us really operating as we should be. We're operating with all of this left brain thing going and not too much of the right. Well, here are the charts here. These are just average charts. There are hundreds and hundreds of these. They took everybody's brainwave scans as they were going along. Now the top chart shows a normal starting base, where in effect, and this would be any one of us at any moment in time, the brain waves coming off the left side were far outweighing those, the red ones, on the right-hand side of the brain. The effects, they say, is immediate and cumulative. At the bottom is the first immediate effect. What happens is that the left has now contracted back to meet the right, and the right's grown just a little bit, but they've absolutely synchronized. The left and the right brain of this person, and this is the immediate effect, has now begun. And then they say it's cumulative, because what then happens is that it all grows to where the blue one was at the beginning. Quite extraordinary. Our research clearly shows that the left-right brain imbalances predominate in many mental behavioral dysfunctions, such as dyslexia and ADHD. It is our professional opinion that the monatomic products would be of tremendous benefit in any of these conditions. It is the most obvious answer as a healthy alternative to chemicals that have harmful side effects. To that, Sean Adam, the director, adds, if I were going to take an exam, mental or physical, I would take monatomic elements immediately beforehand. The worst that could happen is that there would be a little improvement. There could be a lot. What about somebody who's permanently doing this, getting those into balance and growing with it? This is exactly what the old texts told us that these things would do. They made them into bread cakes. They fed them to the priests. They fed them to the pharaohs. It gave them longevity. It gave them extra creativity. It enhanced their perception. It enhanced their intuition. It enhanced their awareness. All the qualities of leadership came from the MUFKUTZ, from the shamana, from these golden cakes that they called bread.
In ancient Judea, a devout sect of Judaism, known as the Essenes, thrives. For generations they live in poverty, choosing to seek spiritual enlightenment by avoiding worldly pleasures. Essenes are vegetarian, do not marry, forbid the expression of anger, study the books of the elders, and safeguard the secrets kept in their sacred writings. During the Jewish revolt of 66 CE, the Essenes believe that a Roman invasion is imminent, so they hide their manuscripts in the caves outside the city before the Romans burn it to the ground. In 1946, Bedouin shepherds stumble across the hidden scrolls when they throw a rock in a cave and hear a shattering sound. 2,000 years later, the sacred writings of the Essenes, known today as the Dead Sea Scrolls, were found.
The Essenes lived in strict reclusive communities, some allowing women and some not. One of these communities was at Kirbat Qumran. The Essenes severed ties with the temple in Jerusalem. Rather than temple prayer, the main ritual activity centered around communal meals, to which only the fully initiated were permitted. Before each meal, the Essenes purified themselves by immersion in water. The Essenes developed an extensive code of conduct explained in the rule of the community. They meticulously observed the law of Moses and had to swear an oath to carefully preserve the books of the sect. 2,000 years later, we are indebted to the Essenes for their care in preserving the written word. Their legacy is known to us as the Dead Sea Scrolls.
The lost secrets of the ancient Jewish sect called the Essenes, whose strange rituals told the secret of how man might communicate with God directly, as King Solomon had. Al-Aqsa Mosque, ground zero for the Freemasons. Al-Aqsa was built directly on top of the ruins of the Jewish temples that preceded it, including, according to tradition, the central icon in all of Freemasonry, the Temple of Solomon.
The Essenes were a group of primarily Jewish mystics who were living in Jerusalem and also Alexandria, Egypt, in the period from 150 BC to approximately 70 AD. They were known as some of the most elite scholars of their time. They were deeply interested in a singular subject, and that was how can humans transform into celestial beings or angels. The documentation about the Essene belief in human transformation is found in what is known as the Dead Sea Scrolls, a cache of documents that was discovered quite serendipitously in 1947. Virtually from the moment the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered, they were controversial, because the moment scholars began peeling away the layers of the Essene teachings, they realized that Christianity, in its earliest and most primitive form, was based on the teachings of the Essenes. That the Essenes were not just talking about making contact with angelic beings, they were living with them. These celestial beings had come down from the heavenly realms and were communing, living with the Essenes. And not only that, they were taking humans into the celestial realms and transforming them into angelic beings. After the genocide of the Essenes in 68 AD, the 1st to 4th centuries AD saw the Essene Ascension teachings go underground and reform as Gnostic. This religion was so named because it depended upon personal spiritual revelation, the gnosis, or knowledge of God. Gnosis simply means knowledge, especially of divine mysteries, pointing to the mystical desire of the Gnostics to expand their consciousness beyond ordinary perception and to see beyond the veil. This enables access to the divine realm, and according to some scholars, the mystical path by which the Gnostics attained illumination is mapped and teachable. This means anyone can follow this path. Thanks to the Essenes, now a shift had happened. The Gnostics, practicing what they called Hekalat and Merkabah teachings, now began to emphasize the practice of ascension and seeing God. Through the choices one makes in their life, their spiritual practices, mystical techniques, personal deeds, and inner awareness, one can initiate an encounter with an angel and journey to heaven. Practices like yoga, fasts, diets, cleansing rituals, singing songs, chanting of hymns, prayers, incantations, and repeating the divine name, active visualization, meditation were all used to expand the perception of the Gnostic adept. The effect of these practices included ecstatic trance, a sense of the soul, deep meditation, dream vision, hallucination, crossing into other dimensions, and ultimately, the dissolution of the human into light. All of the Gnostic spiritual practices were aimed at preparing the mystic to enter the celestial chamber of God or the Merkaba throne and an encounter with the Mighty One. After passing through 7 heavens, the mystic must penetrate the 7 resplendent palaces of the 7th heaven itself before arriving at the throne of glory, said Ezekiel. And once there, the traveler encounters God on his throne. The visionary was taught to expect God to be wearing a garment of light. The vision of it includes a mystical experience that transforms the body of the visionary into light. The Gnostics believed in a divine spark in man, deriving from an eternal divine realm, fallen into this world of matter and fate, and needing to be awakened by a divine counterpart. They upheld the Serpent of Eden as a savior figure who sought to provide humanity with key knowledge to awaken. As may be expected, the traditional church fathers saw Gnosticism as an anti-Christian heresy. Simply put, however, Gnosticism is the earliest form of Christianity. The primitive Christiani, the so-called heretics who preceded the historic Christians, were all Gnostics. It was Roman Catholicism that labeled them heretics in an effort to consolidate its growing power. Gnostic Christianity focuses primarily upon the inner and secret teachings Jesus gave after the resurrection. That is, Jesus appears to the disciples in his light body form after his ascension. The Gnostics thought of themselves as the true interpreters of these secret teachings of Jesus. The Gnostics were condemned as heretics by the bishops of the early Christian church because they would not accept the canon of the New Testament or the apostolic creed or the authority of the new church.
Do you know when you talk about halos, that the original halo was a mushroom cap? Well, there's a book called The Sacred Mushroom and the Cross. It's by John Marco Allegro, and he was a biblical scholar that was one of the guys that was assigned to decipher the Dead Sea Scrolls, which is the oldest version of the Bible.
Yes.
Well, this guy, John Marco Allegro, studied it for 14 years, and it was his conclusion after he was done that the entire Christian religion was a giant misunderstanding. And what it was originally about was the consumption of psychedelic mushrooms and fertility rituals. And they started doing all of these, like these different scholars who studied ancient art and ancient religious art. They started finding this mushroom iconography and all this ancient artwork. And one of the things they notice is that the bottom of a mushroom, if you take like particularly the Amanita muscaria mushroom, which is the one that they connect to the Christian religion, look at the bottom of it, see what it looks like with all those lines. Now look at that. That was the original halo. And if you see that picture with Jesus with the halo around his head, the halo was essentially the bottom of a mushroom cap. And the idea, they believe, was that these people were the ones that were consuming the psychedelic mushrooms, so they had this great wisdom and this connection to God. That's what they thought mana was. That's what they thought these psychedelic mushrooms were, the flesh of God.
I like that.
Yeah, and so that when you have these ancient religions that were possibly based on the consumptions of these psychedelic mushrooms, all that stuff has kind of been lost in the translation over years and years and years, and then even the visualization of the halos changed.
Yeah.
The sacred mushroom, the key to the door of eternity, the search for the sacred plant of the ancients, used to send the mind to another world and into the future. Let me tell you something. I've never tried any drug in the world ever. Not pot, nothing, ever. However, I am not so stupid as to not be well informed about the potentials for the mushroom. The magic mushroom, from all indication, is a sincerely important discovery that was made in the ancient and prehistoric world. This stuff works. The magic mushroom and other hallucinogenic drugs like that do something to the electromagnetic forces in the brain to open up your mind and open up your spirit to all kinds of profound things that you're just totally not aware of. So while this is a hallucinogenic drug, nonetheless, this is a very important stuff here. Magic mushrooms are not to be laughed at. It is not a light thing. This stuff is very serious stuff. And that particular kind of mushroom is called a Amanita muscara. The sacred mushroom and the cross, John Allegro, the third man in charge of the Dead Sea Scrolls, wrote this book. The sacred mushroom and the cross. A study of the nature and origins of Christianity within the fertility cults of the ancient Near East by John Allegro. John Allegro was the number 3 man appointed by the state of Israel, England, and America in charge of the Dead Sea Scrolls. The top 3 men that were picked in the beginning were all fired because of what they said was in the Dead Sea Scrolls that was not supposed to be said. All 3 men were fired. There is the Amanita muscara. Here in the catacombs of Rome, under the Vatican, you will find paintings in the old catacombs of the Amanita muscara being the sacred tree of knowledge of good and evil. Well, the whole concept is if you take the mushroom, it opens up your mind to all kinds of off-the-wall things. Of course, you can talk to God.
The Pope gave me dope. Well, no, the Pope didn't give me dope, and that's exactly what I'm bitching about. Is these religious systems don't give you dope. They don't give you the real thing. They don't give you the manna. They don't give you the bread. They don't give you the fountain of living waters. They don't give you none of it. They give you a bunch of crap instead. Or they give you a wafer and they say, here it is, eat this. This is the gift of God. And you go, oh, nothing happened. Yeah,
exactly.
Totally.
All the vestments of the Catholic Church are remnants of the ancient flag area. They dress like Amanita. The Pope wears his red cap and his red mantle over his shoulders with the white gown. Yeah. It's all over the Catholic Church.
Allegro is a little different case. Do you all know the book, The Sacred Mushroom and the Cross? He managed to hypothesize one of the most radical theories ever to come down the pike. I don't know how true it is, but his theory is that Jesus was a mushroom. And, you know, this would not probably have cut too much mustard, except that the guy was a Dead Sea Scroll scholar of world renown, had a scholar's grasp of Aramaic and Akkadian, and was fully licensed to be one of the people who tell us what the primary documents of Christianity really mean. The problem was, when Allegro got a hold of them, he said, well, what they really mean is that a sacramental mushroom was being grown in caves by Nabateans down around Qumran, and they called it Jesus in order to befuddle the Roman authorities, and created the cheerful theory of the friendly carpenter who tells us to render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's. And this was all a publicity stunt just to keep the Roman authorities guessing. And he claims he has textual support for this. The problem is you have to be an Aramaic philologist to follow the argument. The Gnostic temperament is alive and well. In fact, there hasn't been a century as friendly to Gnosticism as the 20th since the 4th. So there you have it. The assumption is that Christ was born in 6 BC under the conjunctio maximus of Jupiter and Saturn. That places, if you believe the Gospels, that he was killed at age 33. That means the crucifixion must have been in 27. Well, there is no reference to Christ outside the Gospels until AD 71. What was happening between 27 and 71? It's damn near 50 years. And the whole thing falls silent. And then what we get in 71 in, I think the Roman, I guess it's in Suetonius. Suetonius, who was a Roman historian and contemporary, he says in a long rap about something else, he says, Jews have recently come to Rome and caused public disturbances at the behest of their leader, Crispus. This is as close as we get. We don't even know if Crispus is Christ. We just accept that this must be so because Suetonius is telling us that Jews of a religious type have come to Rome and caused this agitation. Some people have even wanted that Christianity was invented in the late 60s, and that there never was a person named Christ, that zealots who were preparing the uprising of 69 against the Roman Empire created a mythical figure of a generation earlier and used this mythical figure as a symbol of their rebellion. There is enough material to suggest that Christ was someone's follower, and that what he was saying had been said a generation earlier by someone else of whom we have no trace. And, you know, this is hot, hot stuff, because it just cannot be that way if you're Orthodox.
The presentation of the Jesus character, it's somewhat of a composite of many messianic leaders of the time.
Christianity was invented by a little-known family of Roman Caesars, the Flavians, and they left us documents to prove it. The primary discovery is that the story of Jesus Christ that we have in the Gospels is fiction, and it was based upon a military campaign of a Roman Caesar named Titus Flavius, who waged a war in the 1st century against a messianic movement. The reason that the Romans wanted to create their own Savior Messiah is because they wanted to have a pacifistic Christ.
Jesus, as a human being, never existed.
Christianity was used as a political tool to control the masses of the day, and it is still being used this way today.
The Roman Empire made the emperor a god. Well, imagine the cynicism that would pervade our society if you were under state order to light candles to George Bush. I mean, you know, we're free to think of the man as a jackass, and it's not heresy. And the state religion, the religion of the emperor as God, was fairly tolerant. You had to burn a candle to Caesar, but you could also burn a candle to Astarte and Thoth and Hermes and all these other people. What got the Christians in trouble was they wouldn't give Caesar his due, even though it says to do this. You know, they kept claiming that they had some kind of political agenda. They kept expecting the return of a political figure. The Romans hated that because they saw it as a political force. Well, in that situation then, you see, you have to talk about early Christianity to get this stuff in context. People don't understand how shaky our knowledge of the origins of Christianity are, with good reason, because a religion wants you to believe that it's all very cut and dried. There are real mysteries surrounding the birth of Christianity. He said that these zealots were using Amanita muscaria as a sacrament, and that Christ was was a symbol of the mushroom, so that they could refer to the mushroom without directly referring to it, so that only the believers would know. John Allegro's case is interesting, but not entirely persuasive. There needs to be more work in this area. There is something going on in the ancient Middle East about mushrooms. Mandaeanism, which is an old cult in that part of the world, forbids the use of mushrooms, which is puzzling since there are none, and they don't forbid much, but they go way out of their way to forbid mushrooms.
Cleopatra was the last in a succession of Hebrew Ptolemy kings. Although Cleopatra is considered to be the last of the Egyptian pharaohs, author Ralph Ellis claims that Jesus was the last of the Hebrew pharaohs of Egypt. The historical facts show that the last pharaoh of Egypt was Ptolemy XV, who was nicknamed Caesarion or Little Caesar. Born in 47 BC, Caesarion was the son of two of the most famous parents in world history, Roman ruler Julius Caesar and Egyptian pharaoh Cleopatra. When Caesarion's mother, Cleopatra, proclaimed herself to be the reincarnation of the virgin goddess Isis, Caesarion became the son of a virgin mother goddess. Caesarion's father, Julius Caesar, was elevated to the status of god by the Roman Senate. Caesarion was recognized as the son of God and heir to God's kingdom, the Roman Empire. Caesarion was also recognized as the son of God in Egypt, after his mother named him co-ruling pharaoh of Egypt. Cleopatra declared Caesarion to be the king of kings at the age of 13 during the Donations of Alexandria ceremony in 34 BC. History suddenly changed when Caesarion's father, Julius Caesar, was stabbed to death by his most trusted men. Octavian, the adopted son of Julius Caesar, swiftly seized power as the new Roman emperor. After Caesar's death, Cleopatra became romantically involved with a married commander from Caesar's army named Mark Antony. Mark Antony and Cleopatra parented 3 children, a twin boy and girl, followed by a second boy. Since Caesarion was Julius Caesar's son and the rightful heir to the Roman Empire, Cleopatra feared for his safety. Caesarion was forced to hide his identity and change his name. The Egyptian name for Jesus is Isu, which means the son of Isis. Since Caesarion was the true heir to the Roman Empire, Emperor Octavian wanted him killed. Selene eventually married and became the Queen of Mauritania. Like her mother Cleopatra, Selene wore the headdress of the goddess Isis. The authenticated ancient scrolls found at the Hemis Monastery near Leh in Kashmir document the life of Saint Issa, leaving home at the age of 13, joining a merchant caravan, traveling the Silk Route, and arriving in India at the age of 14. The Egyptian word for Jesus is Isu. The Greek word is Iesus, and the Arabic word for Jesus is Isa. Isa continued his travels through India and Tibet and the holy cities, where Brahmin priests taught him to read and understand the Vedas. He learned Pali and studied the sacred sutras and how to cure by aid of prayer. He began teaching, performing miracles, and explaining the holy scriptures in monasteries and market bazaars. As an adult, Issa finally left India and Tibet and traveled to Alexandria, Egypt. Selene's half-brother Caesarion finally returned to Egypt after 17 years in hiding. He searched for Selene and found her. He was now called Jesus Christ, a name with the same initials as his father, JC, for Julius Caesar. He told Selene about his plan to capture his father's kingdom, the Roman Empire, which Emperor Octavian had stolen from him. She changed her name from Selene to Magdalene by adding the word Magda to her name, which means high place in Hebrew. Jesus Caesarion also searched for and found his 2 half-brothers, one of whom was Selene's twin. His nickname was Thomas Didymus, which means twin in Greek and Hebrew. 17 years after her suicide, Cleopatra's 4 children were all reunited again. Why are the pages of the Bible silent about where Jesus was and what he did for 17 years from the age of 13 to 30? Jesus Caesarion learned the art of healing and meditation in India.
The Zadokим are the ultra-righteous wing of the Essene movement. They believed in human perfection. In other words, that humans can become whole, holy, and complete, just like Adam and Eve. In the Gnostic belief, in the Garden of Eden story, Adam and Eve did not have bodies of flesh and blood. They had light bodies. And as a punishment, the Old Testament God Yahweh created coats of skin for humanity, the flesh and blood bodies that we inhabit. The Gnostics were intent on reclaiming our original primordial light bodies. And this is what the Zadokim referred to as perfection, returning to our original perfection. And this is very difficult for some people. They look at this and think, well, who are you to become perfect? Nobody's perfect. But the Zadokim believed that humans could transform themselves into perfect light beings, actually returning to our original condition. Gnosticism was attacked and destroyed by Christian orthodoxy because it claimed it possessed the secret teachings of Jesus, of the living Jesus, the risen or resurrected Jesus. Gnosticism also promotes the idea that any individual can have a direct, personal, and visionary experience with the risen Christ. If you can have that, what do you need a pope for? What do you need a priest for? What do you need a church hierarchy for? You don't. The church sells the past Jesus, the past actions. Gnosticism says, let's go into the future. Let's move forward. Today we are experiencing a dramatic revival of Gnosticism worldwide. We're recovering knowledge of the Gnostic Gospels, where we recovered the Dead Sea Scrolls, and now the public literature is starting to open up to the real secret teachings of Jesus, which is absolutely phenomenal.
Ayahuasca and magic mushrooms are incredible and life-changing for many people. If you have never had a real distinctive spiritual experience, they can provide it. It is one thing to read about the spiritual experiences of Jesus or Krishna or Muhammad, and another to have your own.
The central perception of Gnosticism, no matter how you slice it, is that we don't belong here, that we are strangers, that something terrible happened, and that accounts for why we're here, that we were destined for a much better deal, and something went terribly, terribly wrong. It takes different forms. Then the goal of Gnostics, born into this unfortunate world, is to gather the light together, to save the light. The light is defiled by its presence in the world of material existence, and the light must be gathered. Well, so then the central soteriological concern, that means the central salvational concern of Gnosticism, is how shall we gather the light? And their whole theology then is, what is the light? How should we gather it? And once we have it, what do we do with it? And then there were various answers.
Wasson wrote a very convincing book to show that the Eleusinian mysteries were an ergot, a cult of ergot intoxication. I thought that sounded totally crazy before I read the book. I thought that it was going to be some flung together case that would convince nobody. Actually, I can't believe that it's anything else. Having read the book, the evidence is overwhelming. Well, Eleusis was the central wellspring of mystery for the Western mind for 2,000 years. Everybody who was anybody went to Eleusis and had the experience. And there were times when the mystery was profaned to the point that writers can speak of wealthy Athenians who had the mystery in their house, were able to offer it to their guests after dinner. Well, what kind of mystery is this? And John Allegro wrote a much less convincing book, The Sacred Mushroom and the Cross, trying to say that Christianity itself
was a mushroom cult. In fact, going much further than that, saying that Christ himself was in fact no person at all, but a system of coded epigrams for a mushroom. His case is harder to judge because it depends on a knowledge of Aramaic philology. In the Avestan classical period, no one would have dreamed of having a spiritual experience without resort to drugs. They just put it very plainly. They're the most matter-of-fact people. These texts are fascinating, but they don't devalue it. They say, you know, here's our map of the spirit world entirely based on our drug experiences, and here are the drugs we use, and to see these angels you must use this drug, and to see these angels this drug, and so forth. We don't really know what these drugs were because the etymologies are lost, but harmaline figures very strongly in all of this, and of course harmaline is a neurotransmitter present in human metabolism. That's all it would take, because in the human pineal gland there is a compound called adenosine. That's what the enzymologists call it. But when you show it to a plant biochemist, he says it's 6-methoxy-tetrahydroharmalan. And so it is. Adenoglomerotropine and 6-methoxy-tetrahydroharmalan are the same thing. Well, it's a psychedelic harmine alkaloid, similar to what's in Pergamon harmala. It could be converted to DMT by a simple methylation. Well, a one-gene mutation would make a methylation possible. Gordon Wasson, he decided Soma was this mysterious, ecstatic, hallucinogenic plant that the Rig Vedas were basically composed about. The major subject of the Rig Vedas is Soma. The 9th mandala of the Rig Veda is a paean of praise to Soma, that it exalts it above all the other gods. And no one knows what Soma was. And the descriptions are puzzling. It seems to have been, it didn't have leaves. It had yellow flowers, it grew in the mountains, and they speak of pressing it. It was prepared some way, it was pressed, it was filtered, and then they talk about this golden liquid which they drank. And Gordon Wasson, because of the importance of the Indo-Aryan people who wrote the Vedas for connecting up all of the history of what archaeologists call Old Europe with the Neolithic Middle East and India, it was very important to try and understand what Soma was.
Hypercarbylation, for such we had named the process of altering the neural DNA and changing a human being into an eternal hyperdimensional being. Hypercarbylation was to be the shamanic defeat of death, that those doorways the dead enter through daily were finally to be thrown open to a hypercarbonated humanity that would then have freedom of movement to and from an eternity in which the species was a living reality.
A philosophy called Hermeticism that was developed in the 1st and 2nd centuries by Gnostic thinkers, Greeks, Jews, people inside the Roman Empire as it was beginning to show the first signs of degradation and decay. Philosophers drew back from the rise of Christianity with its doctrine of the fall of man and original sin and the stain of Adam and Eve and that whole thing, and took a different tack and made 2 points which I think we need to recover and live out for ourselves. And the first point was that man, which means men and women, human beings, are divine beings, not lower than the angels, higher than the angels. The message of the alchemical and hermetic thinkers, and the Corpus Hermeticum actually uses the phrase, man is God's brother. we have no idea what it would mean in our own lives if we could throw off the notion of ourselves as fallen beings. We are not fallen beings. When you take into your life the gnosis of the light-filled vegetables, the psychedelic plants that have stabilized the sane societies of this world for millennia, the first message that comes to you is you are a divine being. You matter. You count. You come from realms of unimaginable power and light, and you will return to those realms.